Welcome back to Wednesday Night Fightback. Now, this week we're going to tackle something which is quite controversial potentially, which is the Russia-Ukraine war. And it's just over a year since Russia's reprehensible invasion of Ukraine. And a number of observations come out of it, I think, which I need to discuss with you, Michael. So the first observation I think that comes out of it is that after a year of slugging it out and awful situation, neither Russia nor Ukraine has the upper hand militarily, and it therefore seems unlikely that you're going to get Russia cleared out of every bit of Ukraine, and it seems unlikely that the Russians are going to have a military victory themselves. Do you agree with that?
Well, if that's what's going to happen, then that will be what happens in most wars. I think we are habituated by the First World War and the Second World War by thinking that wars end with victory or defeat. Complete victory, complete defeat. And of course, historically, that doesn't tend to be the case. What tends to happen is that exhaustion, extraordinary punishing costs of continuing the war, and an agreed armistice on grounds which are essentially unattractive to both sides, but which they can live with, albeit they tell themselves they're going to live with it temporarily. So maybe that's what we're heading towards here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Actually, and historically, another thing that tends to happen and has happened in many places is that human beings opt for an awful compromise like partition of a country, and that's very common. Ireland, Cyprus, Germany, Korea, Vietnam spring to mind. And but what worries me is that this awful war could drag on for many years. And look at Afghanistan. Best part of 20 years the West was involved there. So we'd hope that we can end it in some way, but it's very difficult. There seems to be no particularly satisfactory way that you can envisage it being ended.
Well, I think you've got two sides with two different sort of agendas. You can't ever see the Ukrainians giving up at this point.
No.
You look at the history of the 20th century with Russia, and it's just terrible. And now this invasion, they're not going to give up.
No, nor should they.
Nor should they. So their capacity to resist will be dependent only on as long as basically the West continues to arm them. For Russia, on the other hand, it's a different case. It's really not at all clear that Russia has an absolutely existential need to conquer Ukraine. And if it did conquer it, my God, can you imagine the cost of keeping it? It's just insane cost of keeping it. So I would have thought that Russia had more to gain by an armistice than Ukraine. So I think it's sort of on them, really.
Well, let's just go into that, because one of the other observations which I'd make, just over a year into this, is that the sanctions that the West has correctly put on Russia hasn't been unanimity across the world, has there? That's an interesting observation. So you've got, basically the United States, Canada, the EU, Britain, and you've got Australia, New Zealand, possibly Singapore, South Korea, some oil's getting through to Japan and things. But the rest of the world, it's an interesting observation. The rest of the world doesn't seem particularly bothered. So there's two questions. Why do you think that is? And what has caused that reaction?
Well, I think there are two things. I think firstly, my goodness me, we do like to tell the world what's the good thing to do, don't we? Across an absolutely massive range of subjects, we in the West like to tell people how they should behave, which isn't always a good look. And it's particularly not a good look when, in recent living memory, we've made such a mess of invading places like Iraq, obviously, like Libya, obviously, like Afghanistan. So I think these countries will probably look at the West and say, oh, goodness me, they're lecturing us again about what we should do, and yet look at them. Not exactly paragons of virtue, are they? And also, you have to remember, and this is something which we don't like to admit, is that the West, and Britain in particular, has spent the last couple of 100 years trying to conquer these people, and in some cases conquering and enslaving them. It's not necessarily obvious that they're going to view us automatically as the good guys, even if we are.
I would agree. I think, yes, to some extent, just Western influence seems to be waning. There's a lot of talk of multipolarity in the world and the challenge of China, which is obvious. But yeah, the speed with which people, yes, okay, I'll agree to whatever America and the West wants. It seems to be waning rapidly. One thing that you flagged up finally, just to tackle this, you flagged up the possibility of an important election in Turkey that could change things. Could you describe what you mean?
Yeah, I do think this could be important, and I haven't seen it mentioned a great deal. But look, this summer we have elections in Turkey, which may or may not overthrow Erdogan. Now, Erdogan, for whatever you may think of him, and he has been repressive in many ways, but he has played a very, very canny game, intermediating between Ukraine and Russia and Iran, actually, and keeping all those doors half shut, half open. And I think that's been of enormous benefit to the region as a whole. And I worry, frankly, and this is going to be very unpopular, I worry that if Erdogan doesn't get re-elected, and is replaced by someone who is just plainly pro-Western, then Russia will feel itself massively more encircled. And that, I think, would be very dangerous. I think it would be very dangerous. If Russia finds out that they now have someone in Istanbul who can close the Bosphorus, then, what's the point in having Crimea? They're already encircled. Their warm water port would be gone, at which point I think all bets are off for what Russia might do. So I kind of worry a lot about that election, yeah.
Well, we should follow it, Michael. I mean, I've argued consistently that a key aim for the West in the Russia-Ukraine conflict is to make sure that we don't get escalation and this conflict spilling elsewhere, because actually historically that has precedent as well. So let's watch what happens in Turkey with interest. But thanks very much for your comments.
Okay.
Take care.
And you too.